Hi, I'm Beth Rubin. I am an associate professor of education at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and in the United States. And in my research, I look at how young people come to see themselves as citizens. And I look at this across a variety of settings, taking into account both the very local experiences that young people have in their schools and communities and families, but then also looking out to larger national settings and even global dynamics that I think impact how young people come to see themselves as citizens. So I think that we're at a crisis point for citizenship education right now, really across the world, and I think that we are at the point now where traditional approaches to citizenship education, it's becoming apparent that those traditional approaches to citizenship education are inadequate for speaking to young people about the issues that they care about most. By traditional approaches to citizenship education, I mean by traditional approaches to citizenship education, I'm speaking about approaches that are focused on teaching patriotism, teaching some version of a unified national identity, a unified national history, those sorts of approaches which really dominate across the world and are found in most textbooks related to civic education and history education, fall short in speaking to the actual day-to-day experiences of young people in their communities. And they fall short in really grappling with the long-term conflicts and the manifestations of inequality that mark the civic experiences of many young people, particularly young people from marginalized communities. Both the United States and Guatemala provide good examples of how traditional forms of citizenship education really fall short in helping young people to make sense of their citizenship in today's society. In the US, young people from racially marginalized groups are becoming more vocal about the conflicts that they see between the promises of liberty and justice in the United States' founding documents and their day-to-day and community experiences with police violence and other forms of institutionalized inequality. In my research in Guatemala, in a variety of communities, I found that young people really drew their understandings of their place in Guatemalan society less from what they were learning in their history and citizenship education classes and more from the communities that they were raised in, and that the curriculum was not directed at helping them to grapple with some of the most difficult issues in the country's past. New forms of citizenship education are needed. New forms of citizenship education are needed to help young people learn to grapple with the conflicts that are part of their national history and new forms of citizenship education are needed that can help young people grapple with the conflicts that are part of their nation's past and present. I see four important areas for citizenship education for the 21st century. The first is the development of kids' ability to engage in civil conversation with each other, to have discussions about controversial issues, both from the present and from the past. And I'll talk in a few minutes about different ways that this can be cultivated. The second is really engaging with difficult histories, and rather than papering over them and trying to present the past as something that we've moved on from and where no one really has responsibility, to really dig into troublesome areas of the past and preserve the historical memory that really isn't going to go anywhere, even if we don't engage with it directly. I found this in my research in Guatemala, that even though the national curriculum really focused on the development of a diverse democracy and spent a lot of time focusing on notions of human rights and looking at the peace accords, that students and teachers in indigenous schools still really needed to discuss past conflicts. They needed to talk about the armed conflict and what their communities had suffered during the armed conflict. They even really felt they needed to talk about Spanish colonialism and the continued impact of Spanish colonialism on their communities. So though that historical memory is there, and the social studies classroom is the place where young people are going to get a chance to explore that history so that they can then think about a future that makes sense for them as a community. So civic conversation, historical memory. The third important element of a new form of citizenship education for the 21st century is to really develop and embrace a more fluid understanding of citizenship, that people have multiple allegiances, that citizenship is rooted in the sense of belonging, and belonging is not set in stone, and people feel like they belong to both their nations and to particular communities and to language groups and to other forms of affiliation, and that more fluid, overlapping, changeable sense of citizenship is more true to how young people are thinking about themselves in relation to the nation. And by framing citizenship as a fluid set of affiliations that for which you don't need to give up one thing to become another, it allows for wider participation by diverse groups in society. And the fourth aspect of citizenship education for the 21st century that I think is important is to develop an appreciation for democracy as something you do rather than something you are. And by that, I mean to look at democracy as a process and a practice rather than a set of policies and views that are handed down from teacher to student, from government to citizen. If democracy is something that you do, then the social studies classroom and the civic education classroom is where you should be learning how to do it. There are a lot of strategies that teachers can use to help their students learn to engage with each other around issues of past and present conflict. In my work with social studies teachers, both new teachers and experienced teachers, we learn how to, first of all, create a classroom community where young people feel safe to share their ideas by developing and setting some guidelines and talking about how we want to listen to and be responded to by each other. And then we learn various activities to promote conversation. And these include activities where young people read texts looking at different sides of an issue and then talk through those different sides, called a deliberation. Another activity that young people really like is sometimes called a take a stand or a continuum or a barometer, where everybody stands up and you make a statement, and on one side of the room it says agree, on the other side it says disagree, and then the students stand where they feel their position is at that moment. So, for example, we might ask a question like, should the city of New Brunswick, where my university is, be a sanctuary city for immigrants? And if you feel like you agree with that, you go to one side of the room, disagree, go to the other. If you are on a range, then you go somewhere in the middle. And then the students talk from their positions on that line, and they move if they change their minds. And in that way, they listen to each other. They think about having an opinion as something that can change based on evidence that they hear. And they learn that in a democracy, people have lots of different opinions and can talk through those. Seminars are a useful practice where kids sit in a circle and we talk about an idea and a text in an open way to get all the ideas out and to develop our understandings. There are a lot of different activities that that teachers can facilitate to help kids become good at talking with each other, articulating their differences, listening to each other's opinions, considering evidence, and generally seeing that kind of engagement as important and part of their citizenship practice.